My name is Emily Hooks. I am an author and the founder of the Forgiveness Academy. We work with individuals, mental health professionals, and organizations to develop a deeper understanding of forgiveness and its power in our lives, to empower us to live more boldly, to live free from the limitations of the past. I think we're living in a world where the paradigm of believing that we need to suffer in order to learn is shifting. And I'm trying to do my part to help change that paradigm. My book, The Power of Forgiveness, will be out on Amazon on Friday. You can pre-order it today, but it'll actually start shipping on Friday. So I'm very excited about that. The Kindle is available for pre-order, but it won't be available until May 21st. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Adele Lafrance. She is a PhD clinical psychologist and researcher from Laurentian University in Ontario, Canada, although she's in Denver today. She is the co-developer of emotion-focused family therapy, and we're going to be talking about what that is today. In addition to her research, she also has a private practice and travels and speaks extensively. She supervises and trains individuals and organizations in her private practice in both Canada and in Europe. And her research includes, in addition to the emotion-focused family therapy, she also has done research and applied the EFFT to kids and adults with eating disorders. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that, but more importantly, we're going to be talking about how these techniques and interventions can be applied across the board for parents in general. I'd just like to pause for a second and say welcome again, everybody, for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to make comments and chat. We will have a Q&A at the end, so hold your questions until the end if you don't mind. My assistant, Cara, is here, and she will be putting in useful links and information into the chat and also moderating questions. Hi, Louie. So if you have any urgent questions or technical questions or issues, please go ahead and type those in the chat, and she'll help you with those. Adele, would you like to add anything to your introduction?
Absolutely not. That was very comprehensive. So thank you for that. I'm really, really pleased to be here. I've been following your work as well, and I'm a huge fan. So I'm happy to be a part of this today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hi, welcome everyone. We've got a few more people joining us. So with the introduction set aside, I'd like to just pause really quickly and point a feature out. At the bottom of the attendee list, on my screen, it's on the right, there's a red button that says invite. If you know any parents or mental health professionals or just friends who might be interested, I think we're going to have room for a few more. If we don't, we will upgrade and make sure everybody gets in. But you can, in real time, text or email the link to the webinar by clicking on that invite button. So feel free to do that. So let's get started. I'm really excited about these questions. I'm really excited to help expand people's awareness about the importance of non-forgiveness and self-blame and all these things, particularly as it relates to forgiveness. You know, self-forgiveness for parents, in my opinion, is the single most important application that we can have to a deeper understanding of forgiveness, because whether we realize it or not, our children learn how to relate to themselves and to relate to the people in their lives from their primary caregivers. And they can either learn that holding on to judgments and holding on to being right and to punitive ways of seeing those relationships is the best way to manage life, or they can learn and understand that the best way to manage life is in more of a problem-solving capacity, right? Because that's what forgiveness ultimately is. It's about empowerment, and it's about learning how to manage our messy relationships in life with the most compassion and efficacy that we can. So with that, I'm going to start by asking, if you wouldn't mind, just let us know a little more clearly about what self-blame is exactly and how it relates to forgiveness.
Well, I mean, I use a very basic definition of self-blame in my research. So Anytime you blame yourself for a part of what happened to your children in the context of this parenting webinar, that would constitute self-blame. So if you hold yourself responsible in a way that is negative, in a way that makes you feel bad, then I would categorize that as self-blame. Uh, you can't self-blame if you also forgive yourself. Those two things cannot coexist. You can take responsibility for things, absolutely. You can see your part, your role in a kind of greater awareness of a situation, but you can't self-blame and forgive. And that's true. You know, you
Hmm.
can't blame someone else and forgive them. Like it's really this complex, or not so complex, actually, straightforward kind of dynamic between those two concepts. And so I
Yeah.
am so passionate about helping parents to let go of self-blame and forgive themselves, but also to look at the what's driving the self-blame. Self-blame is actually a
Hmm.
strategy or can be a strategy. And so I'll probably talk a little bit about that as we go on. But really, my hope is to help parents see that self-blame is a strategy, that it gets in the way of forgiveness, self-forgiveness, and that that's really important in the context of parenting.
Great. Thank you. That's very clear. I'm just going to, Cara, let me know if that's a little better. She says I'm a little bit loud. I don't want to blow anybody's ears out, so I'm trying to figure out how to adapt that. So let me know if that's a little bit better. So your research focused on the role of self-blame for parents, particularly of adolescent and young adult or adult children
Mm-hmm.
with eating disorders.
Mm-hmm.
When you looked at parents who blame themselves for their children's challenges, for their eating disorders or any challenges really, what did you find?
Yeah, well, for a number of years, I'd worked with children, adolescents, adults with severe mental health issues, including eating disorders. And my approach always involves parents. I see parents as key in recovery. In eating disorders in particular, there's a long, dark history of parent blame, very similar to autism, very similar to schizophrenia, where mothers primarily were blamed. And oops, many years later, we realized and saw through research, but also just in working with people, with families, that that wasn't the case at all. That
Yeah,
eating disorders were very complex expressions of multi generational pain, multi generational cycles of emotion avoidance, in addition to some biological vulnerabilities, some societal influences. And so there really is nobody to blame. However,
yeah,
when I would meet a mom or a dad for the first time, undoubtedly they somehow blame themselves for their child's illness. And
hmm,
it was so predictable. So even though it's such a complex manifestation of many, many variables, some of which we don't even know yet, parents would present with self-blame. And I would ask them to participate, in the treatment, participate in their child's recovery, and many of them refused. And I thought, well, how does that make sense? Like, why are you refusing? And then the more I got to know what was going on, the more I understood that their refusal was actually a sign of their love for their child because they blamed themselves. And so they thought, well, I'm the blame. And so no way I'm going to get involved because I'll just make things worse. And I don't
oh
want to make
goodness.
things worse. And so that's how this line of research started. So I started to look at how self blame impacted caregiving. And what I found was that the more parents blamed themselves or were afraid of being to blame, the more they felt disempowered, the less they felt capable of, playing a positive role in their child's life. But also, the more they were likely to engage in behaviors that would actually um, interfere with the child's recovery. So in the context of eating disorders, then the parent might be more likely to allow the child to eat diet foods when, the treatment team agreed that that wouldn't be a good idea. They felt so bad. They felt so bad and they were so afraid of making things worse that they would engage in this
Mm-hmm.
way. And so we started to realize then that, wow, self blame is not just a life sentence for the parent, it also has implications for parenting.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. And it points to this idea of self-efficacy, which when I was reading some of your research, first of all, I had to look it up. And Cara, if you wouldn't mind posting the definition of self-efficacy, it would be great. I'm going to try to speak to it. But essentially, what it is feeling capable of doing your job, feeling capable of doing what it is that you set out to do, feeling capable of succeeding in your job. And
Mhm.
so the importance of this. So I'm just going to read a quote from one of the papers that I read because it's so powerful and poignant. It says, teams of clinicians are in agreement regarding their belief about parental self-efficacy as the most important aspect of family-based therapy. That's a very bold statement.
Mhm.
So this belief in our ability to parent effectively really is a fundamental aspect of, the relationship to blame, right? Because when we're blaming, and we'll talk a little bit about why we blame in a second, because it's consistent with what I teach as well, that it's not really what we think it is. Um, could you just talk a little bit? We'll talk about the intervention
For
in a minute, but
sure,
could
for
you just
sure.
take a few minutes and talk about your understanding of this idea of the importance of feeling like you're capable of being effective in your role as a parent?
Yeah, well, in some previous research that I'd conducted, we certainly saw the importance of self-efficacy as a predictor of child outcomes. So that was really remarkable. So it wasn't how motivated the child was, it wasn't, how connected they felt to their therapist. It was how much did the parent believe in their own capacity to support their child. That's what ended up predicting outcomes 3, 6 months later in the domains of anxiety, depression, but also eating problems. And
Yeah,
so all of us were wondering, okay, well, how do we change self-efficacy? Like it's great to know that it predicts everything, but what can we do with this? How can we help parents
right.
to feel empowered? And the psychologist who coined the term, his last name is Bandura. He thought that self-efficacy was a cognitive variable, like a thinking variable. I think I can. But really, what we found
Yeah,
was it's actually an emotional variable and it's related to self blame. So, the more you self blame, the less you feel empowered. And so, if you can get support to transform your self blame, a natural consequence will be that you then feel more empowered. You feel more confident to parent. You feel more confident to set limits. You feel more comfortable to provide emotional support. Because so many
yeah,
parents who struggle in those areas who have low empowerment are terrified that if they set a limit, their child, they'll lose the connection with their child, especially if it's a split family situation. Or they're afraid that if they give them, emotional support around challenging things, that the child might end up feeling worse. Every child's nightmare is for their child to disconnect from the relationship, run away, or, think about suicide. That's every parent's nightmare, one of those three things. So those fears can be very paralyzing.
yeah,
And there is that relationship between self blame and the belief that they can handle these parenting challenges.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll just very briefly tell. So, the primary reason that I engaged on the journey of forgiveness was this exact issue. So for our attendees who don't know me, I have a son, and he was 7, and I got embroiled in a very severe addiction that left me incapable of caring for him. And when I came out of that part of my life, I very quickly realized that I was not um, doing him any favors by constantly reinforcing to him that I was, first of all, not capable, but second of all, that I had done something so fundamentally wrong
Mm.
that he was never going to be okay. And when I realized that forgiveness was the key to teaching him that he is exactly who he was meant to be, that I hadn't made any mistakes that were so bad that he was never going to be okay. That really changed everything, and it was why I initially engaged in the process. It wasn't because I was crazy about myself. It's because I realized how important it was as a parent.
I'm so glad you
Although
shared
I
that
encourage,
personal story. I mean, it really does drive the point home. Self-forgiveness is for
yeah,
everyone. It's not a selfish move.
no,
Self-forgiveness just
yeah,
it creates a domino effect of real positivity and health. It's not easy though, because you have to go through the muck in order to get to the other side, as you know. But it's such a selfless act. It's such a loving act to really allow yourself to forgive yourself for whatever mistakes you made.
yeah. Yeah. So you found something else that was really interesting to me that we talked a little bit before that. So in the context of a therapeutic setting, simply telling parents that they're not to blame, even though all of the research shows that they're not to blame for, really, we're not to blame for any outcome in our children's lives because life is more complex than that.
Very.
But uh, yeah, life is complex. There are a lot of factors involved. But you found that simply telling them that they're not to blame actually was counterproductive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I would love it if I could say to all the parents out there, you're not to blame. And if that could actually lead to a transformation. It could
Yeah,
lead to a temporary state of relief, like, oh, okay, well, if she says it, maybe it's true. But it won't be long. The demons will come knocking on your door again, and they'll be
mhm.
there. And that's because we all have something on ourselves. Okay. So when I
I
meet with a
like that.
parent, and the first thing I'll ask them is, what'd you do? And I don't
Yeah,
actually mean it in a realistic way. I mean, what do you know you did that you feel such guilt over that you can't forgive yourself, that you hold such shame for, that, you're holding yourself hostage? And it's amazing. Parents will say, oh, I took my kid to Weight Watchers when she was 10. Or I, in a fit of anger, I told her that, um, I wish that she'd, I don't know, live with her grandparents for a week or something. Like they remember saying or doing something or things that they stay stuck in their brain. And so when they think about forgiveness,
yeah,
forgiving themselves, there's that part of them that says, oh, no, 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 look at what you did. And self blame can actually be a strategy. I'm not saying it's a very good one. I think it's actually a bad one, but I mean, it's the reality that counts. It's almost a strategy. Like if I blame myself, then the world is predictable. I just have to be better, be different, and I don't have to worry about these bad things happening again. Um,
yeah,
Problem is, self blame is a burden not just for the person themselves, but for everyone around them, because
yeah,
it's very heavy. It's very heavy. Um, and so yeah, so looking at self blame as a strategy. But so I wish I could say to everyone on this call, don't blame yourselves. It's much more complex. That won't work. So instead, I would say to them, what did you do? What do you think you did? Like, speak the crime you think you committed. Tell
mhm,
people. Show it the light of day, because shame, you know, can only grow in the context of secrecy. And so if you can tell someone you
right,
trust, if you can tell a therapist, or a counselor or your pastor, listen, I'm carrying this terrible guilt for all of these things. Hear me out. Don't even let them reassure you at first. Let yourself just move through it, move through the emotions, the sadness, the shame, the guilt, so that you can purge it out of you in some ways. Um, one very,
Mhm.
very common thing that people do is when one of their friends or loved ones saying, "Oh my gosh, I feel terrible. I did this." A very common reaction is to jump to reassurance. Oh, of course you did your best. Of course you did your best.
Yeah. No, no, no.
Yeah. And I'm saying, don't let people
Yeah.
do that. Say, no, 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 hear me out. I need to get it out. I did this. I feel terrible.
Yeah.
Really express the pain associated with the memory so that you can actually move through that emotional experience to a place of deep realization that, of course, you did your best with what you had. But you can't get there unless you walk through the
Yeah.
swamp. And the swamp is where no one wants to go. But as a therapist, that's where I try to hold people's hand and say, okay, let's go through the swamp. Let's tell me all of the terrible things you think you did so that together we
Mhm.
can reach the other side where that can be behind you and you can actually forgive yourself.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about moving through the muck in just a second, but I have a follow-up question on this idea about blame. So one thing that I talk a little bit about in the book and with my clients is the idea that blame is really designed, and you touched on this a little bit, that blame is really a way to create sort of a knowing, right? So we know that we're to fault and we can control that. And I talk a lot about shifting our perspective to one of curiosity instead of one of always knowing. And the reason for that is because it's more accurate. Like life isn't really that predictable in reality. And so blame almost serves this um, this subtle but self-serving um, function for parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to so they're just sort of it's kind of a martyrdom. I'm going to take responsibility for this so that we all know what the cause is. And but the problem with that is you can't effectively facilitate change if you're not focused on what's actually going on.
It's a mind trick, plain
So
and simple. It's a mind trick.
yeah.
It in some ways, self-blame, as yucky as it feels, can actually help us to feel regulated, like you said, because there's some level of control. But it's a mind trick, and
Okay.
so similar to that, Emily, is blaming others. If you blame others, it's a mirror of your own self-blame.
Yeah.
And that's a hard pill to swallow, especially if the other person did do something, that was hurtful or
Yeah.
harmful. When I work with individuals who've been abused, you know, the extent to which they're unable to forgive the other often mirrors the extent to which they hold themselves responsible for the things that happened to them that were through no fault of their own. So many people I've worked with who have been through
Mhm.
really serious episodes of abuse. And again, the inclination is to reassure, of course, it wasn't your fault. You're the victim. That other person was responsible for their actions, blah, blah, blah. But instead, I would say to them, okay, how do you blame yourself for what happened? And it's amazing. People will say,
Mhm.
I didn't cry for help, or I didn't cry loud enough, or I maintained a relationship of some sort with that person. And so there's this story of self-blame that gets in the way
Yeah.
of forgiving the other person, forgiving themselves. It's really pretty amazing
Mhm.
um, how powerful that is. And so there's this expression, if you're pointing a finger, there's three fingers pointing back at you.
Okay.
Yeah. So
It's so
it's
true.
it's so true, but it's a really, really challenging concept to wrap your head around. Because on the
Yeah.
surface, it's like it's so clear. Well, that person did something, harmful. That person did
Yeah.
something that was wrong. Um, but there's this little expression that we use in the EFFT world. It doesn't stick if there's no Velcro. So
That's awesome.
yeah, things don't stay with us unless there's some Velcro inside of ourselves in terms of the extent to which we blame ourselves. Now, that's not always true. Of course, there are exceptions.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I want people to know that. But when you're stuck in blaming others, chances are you haven't forgiven yourself for whatever part you believed you played in it, whether or not it's rational.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit of an absolutist on this. I'm not sure there are exceptions. But you're a
Well,
therapist, you're a
well, you know,
PhD, and I'm not. So,
I
uh,
think you and I see
I
it the
think
same way. So it'll
I
bridge
think
into the
because
next
what
topic.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
around anger.
I'll let you off the hook
Well,
around anger. Yeah, let's talk about that.
I
So
think this is where we're gonna get right back on the same page because I we definitely are. So one of the exceptions is if someone has anger towards another person and it's not validated, then they can harbor some anger, some resentment. And when we talk about parenting, I don't know about you, but I mean, my parents, very lovely parents, um, the parents with whom I work, they're all very loving, but as a society, we are not so good at validating our children's anger. I call it a superpower because when someone's
yeah,
angry towards us, it is so hard to say, you know what?
yeah,
It makes sense that you would feel that way because of this, because of that, because of this. It's so
yes,
hard to get those words out.
yeah.
And if my family members were listening to this call, they would say, Adele, you're no exception. So even though I teach this and I have
I don't think
tons
any
of
of us are.
practice, oh yeah,
Yeah,
I still really, really struggle with it. And then, when anger
yeah,
isn't validated, especially in
yeah. It is
children,
tough. I like to say I
it
don't have
stays
enemies,
inside.
which I think it's.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, so yeah, I mean, you want to help
So
children move through anger so that they can get through that swamp and then forgive their parents for whatever happened.
yeah, yeah. So I talk about this in the context of emotional awareness and about, allowing ourselves to experience the full spectrum of human emotional experience. I mean, every human being has the capacity to feel anger and contempt. And so it's a little conspicuous that we, in the current paradigm that we live in, um, have been taught that it's bad or that it's counterproductive to have that experience. But it is controversial when I speak about the power and the importance of getting mad and getting angry. What I say is, would you be mad if this happened to your best friend? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you should be mad that it happened to you, or in the context of self-forgiveness, that you did it. Um, but what we don't realize is the power of experiencing those feelings. Traditionally forgiveness has been sort of framed as letting go of the past, and I call it moving through. And that's exactly what you were just talking about, moving through the muck. And in my experience, there's no way around it. We have to allow ourselves to feel the pain of
Hmm.
the things that have happened, whether they're things we've done or other people have done, and hopefully in a therapeutic setting is ideal, so that we can come out on the other side. Because in my experience, what happens is those negative emotions actually fuel the experience of gratitude and joy that happens on the other side of forgiveness.
I couldn't say it any better. Um, in order to forgive someone else, you have to express anger. And sometimes people misconstrue spiritual messages, religious messages,
Mm-hmm.
um, to mean that, forgiveness, you must forgive. But forgiveness can't happen until you allow, accept, honor all of the different feelings that you have around the event, including the person. Some people will say, well, I'm
Yeah.
not mad at the person, I'm mad at their actions.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. That's a superhuman power. I don't think that that's healthy. I
That's so
think you can be
nice.
angry with someone and it can
Yeah.
be the most loving thing you can do because moving through the anger, not to stay stuck in it. There's a
Yes.
difference between rejecting anger and assertive anger, but allowing yourself to experience assertive anger will
Mm.
open the door for compassion towards the other. And so I've done some research on forgiveness, and unequivocally what I've seen is that people who are able to really deeply forgive are the ones who allow themselves to go through the muck. And whether or not they express that to the person themselves or to a close friend or to their therapist doesn't matter. It's moving through that phase. And there's one really great example. It's a very tragic example, but a number of years ago, there was a young man who was struck and killed in a vehicular accident, and the driver was drinking and driving. And and the parents, who had a strong spiritual uh, faith, were so quick to forgive. And what I want to say to everyone is, it's wonderful to have that as your goal, but allow yourself to really feel the deep emotions that come with the pain of the challenges of life, however they may come into our sphere of life,
Yeah.
so that we can actually move through. And not to be afraid of anger. Anger is not a bad emotion. Anger is an empowering emotion, but we do need to make sure that we differentiate between rejecting anger and assertive anger. And if you're stuck in rejecting anger, remember what we talked about earlier, chances are you haven't forgiven yourself for whatever part you think that you need to carry blame for.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's really common in the marriage dynamic when somebody has broken trust. Usually the person that could be qualified as the victim finds it difficult to forgive. And I think a part of that is that they're not, or even research shows a part of it is that they're blaming themselves. And they're having the experience of being the victim of the circumstance, which can be confusing. It can be complicated. So
Yeah,
getting to that
it's another mind trap for
accountability in
sure.
it.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So this leads to uh, something that I want to talk about that you mentioned when we spoke before, which is this cycle that parents and kids get into. And I can tell you that I have had this experience with my son, where we sort of get into this dynamic of being, and I don't think it's just with parents and children, but we'll keep it within that context. Um, um, a cycle of resentment. So, the kid, you spoke about rolling her eyes, and I'd love for you to help raise the understanding and the awareness for the parents that watch this and that are watching now about what's really going on when your kids roll their eyes, and is that really resentment, and how do we move past, how do we parent in that situation and break that cycle of resentment. But first, maybe speak to, how we get into that trap.
Well, it's funny. Parenting practices have more to do with social and political influence than actual neuroscience and developmental psychology. The Second World War had an enormous impact on how parents engage with their children. So that military mentality, where there's a clear chain of authority, you do not um, you do not breach that chain of authority. You do not show dissent. You always respect the authority. That traumatized soldiers came home and enacted some of those parenting practices with their children. And who's going to blame them? Like, honestly, they did their very best, because that mentality worked really well when they were on the front line, and they needed to keep themselves safe. But it trickled down into parenting, and so it started this wave of children, can't um, talk back or speak up or show anger. Problem is, anger is a healthy adaptive emotion like any other. And if it's suppressed, it can lead to big problems. And there's lots of research to show that people who suppress anger are at higher risk for autoimmune problems as well as mental health issues. So that's just to give you a bit of the context about how we came to be here. Rolling the eyes is one of my favorite examples. So many parents, including myself, get activated when when a teenager kid rolls their eyes. Like you want to say like don't you dare. But it's
Yeah.
actually a sign of respect. So if you think about it, oh, I know it's bizarre, but it's actually true. So I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. Like this is just true. I talked about this at a training recently, and someone in the audience says, I don't believe that. I was 16 once and I was rolling my eyes at my mom, and it was not a sign of respect. And so I said to her, well, then why didn't you swear at her and call her mean names? Why didn't you unleash your anger that way? And she thought, oh, now I get it. Rolling of the eyes is a sign of submission. It's I know that you're the boss, but I'm not happy. I'm mad about something and I need to express it somehow. And so I'm going to do this very harmless action to show you, to communicate to you that I don't like where this is going. So, rolling of the eyes, if your child rolls their eyes and they're not swearing, calling you names, that is a parenting win. Because they found a way to express displeasure in and it's respectful. It actually is respectful because they have to
Yeah.
get it out. They do have to get it out. Um, and that's really important. How can we help our kids get angry with us? Kids want to forgive and let go, no matter the age. I
Yes.
mean, you can talk to
Yes.
children who are 45 years old who still have difficult relationships with their parents. If you ask them, like, what would it mean to you to resolve that relationship once and for all? I mean, there's nothing more motivating, I think. So, kids, no matter the age, always want to forgive, but they need to go through that experience. And so, if parents can help them, by validating their anger, validating their displeasure, the child will move through it. So, I'll give you an example, very simple. If you're saying to your child, it's time for dinner, and they're watching their favorite TV show, and the normal way of getting them to say, come on, I told you it's time for dinner, and then maybe you'll start saying, if you don't come now, you're going to lose your privileges, etc., etc. What we've found is that if you validate your child's displeasure, oh, no wonder you don't want to come for dinner. you know um, Spaghetti is not as fun as this show that you're watching. And I get it. You're probably
Mhm.
thinking, Mom, Dad, like, why can't we have dinner later? So I don't blame you for being upset for not wanting to come. All right, bud, let's go. You're going to have way more luck because the child's able to move through that experience, and then it's a lot easier for them
Right.
to comply. So that's a really, really simple example,
Yeah.
but it can run the gamut in terms of more touchy or hot topics. If there's time for
Yeah.
more examples, I can give you
And that
others as
really
well.
loops right back to the self-efficacy thing. Yeah. Yeah. And that speaks to how important it is to feel empowered as a parent, right? So that
Hmm.
you can be present to the experience that they might be having. You can put yourself in their shoes.
Exactly. And the investment is so worthwhile because you'll spend way less time nagging and trying to get your kid to comply, and your child will move through their frustration a lot quicker.
Mhm. Okay, this is good. This is so cool. I wish that I'd known all of this when my son was a teenager. I can't lie. And I can tell you that he probably wishes that I knew this when he was a teenager, but that's
Well,
okay.
guess what? It's never too late. You,
It's never too late.
it's
He's
never
there
too
in
late.
Denver too, actually. Maybe.
Cool.
So before we start the Q&A, let's maybe offer parents and mental health professionals, because I know we have both on here, and I know on the replay we'll also have more of both. What do you want them to know? What's the most important thing that you want them to know about forgiveness and this idea of self-blame? And
Yeah.
also talk a little bit more, if you want to, about the intervention and sort of, so in a clinical setting, the intervention is easier to understand. But what can parents do, maybe in the absence of having, even the opportunity to be in a clinical setting with their children, for instance, if they have adult children?
Okay. Okay. Well, there's one intervention. So as part of emotion focused family therapy, there's one component of their intervention. It's called relationship repair. And so I want parents to know that any parent-child relationship can be healed. Any parent-child relationship can be healed. Okay? Doesn't matter how long the rupture has been, doesn't matter how serious the rupture. Um, People want to forgive. Okay, children want to forgive their parents for whatever happened in the past. Okay, we all make mistakes. Life happens. It's messy, as you said in the beginning of the webinar. And so we developed, based on research, a method of delivering an apology to a child to allow that reconciliation to occur. And at first, we had parents apologize to their children because the children blamed
Okay.
themselves. And so we would say to the parents, okay, you own it so that your child can drop their own self-blame, you know? But what
Yeah.
we found was that not only was the intervention impactful for the children, but the parents were dropping their own self-blame at the same time. So I'd ask a parent, okay, does your child hold resentment for something? Yes, for what? Okay, apologize for that in a way that validates their experience, not necessarily the reality or the truth, but validates their experience. And more often than not, the person who got the most relief from doing that apology was the parent. And so it's my favorite intervention because I mean, I had a parent recently divulge to me that their child had been mistreated and they didn't know, but their child had never told them about it. And so they felt terrible about it. And so,
Mm.
we had the parent apologize for the child not being able to talk to her about it. And you know what's the coolest thing? She didn't even apologize to her real child. She apologized to an empty chair in my office,
Oh,
and
that's
then was able to get free from that monkey on her back, that was just so vicious and cruel, always blaming her. I mean, these things happen. And so forgiveness can be achieved through an apology. And it has to be an apology for the other, though, not for the self. And if you want more information on that, you can visit the website www.emotionfocusedfamilytherapy.org or www.mentalhealthfoundations.ca. There's lots of information on that piece. But the other thing is, and I mean, is to pick up a copy of your book, Emily. And so that's how, I mean, you didn't find me, I found you. So I can say that to the people on the webinar. Like, I saw your work and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And so, in the absence of professional help, I think that that book could be a wonderful intervention. I really do. I mean, a wonderful resource. Hmm.
Thank you for that. It really means a lot. Yeah, so one of the things about this intervention that you mentioned that I just want to reiterate and is that um, because a lot when I'm working with my clients, I encourage them to do the work with themselves, not interrelationally. And the reason that I do that is because when we engage another person, we are giving away a little bit of our power. And particularly if you're doing the work by yourself. So I think in a therapeutic setting, it's a little bit different because there's some control, there's some predictability, there's a neutral person there to help guide the dynamic. But when you're doing the healing work by yourself, um, I think it's important to point out that you can do that healing work of offering an authentic emotional apology for the harm that you caused in the absence of interacting with somebody.
Hmm.
That is, I'm really, really glad to see and to hear that there's evidence to show that that is absolutely the case.
For sure. I mean, just two other points, related to that. Just like as a culture, we have an aversion to validating other people's anger towards us. We also have an aversion to apologies because, many people have said, if you want me to apologize, you must think I'm to blame. And there's a huge, huge
Mm.
difference between um, taking ownership for multi-generational cycles of pain. There's a huge difference between that and actually being to blame.
Yeah.
So when I say to, when I try to encourage parents to
Yeah.
to apologize to their kids, I'm like, it's not me. It doesn't mean you're at fault. It means you are making the decision to give this gift to your child in an attempt to interrupt cycles of emotion avoidance, in the generations past. That's a beautiful gift. Um, and it's one that, unless you've been through it, you can't really kind of convey how amazing it is. And so I would say to people,
Mhm.
really try to fight, fight, fight hard against that instinct, to hold off on apologizing.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other piece
Yeah.
is unspoken apologies are beautiful. There are people in our lives who will
Mhm.
never be
Oh,
able to give us in words, these sincere apologies, but I promise you, they are there. And so if you can even give yourself, yeah, an unspoken apology, um, and it can be just as healing, just as freeing. And one final piece on that, I remember I had a friend and I asked them to do something and they didn't do it. And I was really annoyed. And the next time I saw them, they knew they hadn't done it. I knew they hadn't done it. And so they were acting in a very like abrupt way. Like, hey, what's up? How's it going? Like not acknowledging. And I remember feeling so irritated, like, come on, like you have to acknowledge the mistake that you made. And then one day, a gift to myself, it occurred to me that person was behaving in that way because they felt bad. And that was their
bad.
defense mechanism. And so I decided that, you know, of course they feel bad. That's as good as an apology. And so if we can kind of see people's behavior differently, we can see their defensiveness, we can see their pointing of fingers as an expression of remorse, then we can take
Yeah.
that on, um, and that can help us to let go of the resentment that we feel, when our anger isn't validated.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. One of the reasons that I suggest that people uh, be careful about this idea of apologizing or even saying I forgive you in the relationships that they have is because it's hard to know and to predict how the person is going to hear it. So if for and I can give a personal example of this because I apologized to my son probably 1,000 times for the mistakes that I'd made, and it took 999 for me to realize every time I said that, what I was saying was, I'm sorry that I messed you up, right? And I needed to stop doing that. It wasn't helpful, one time, yeah, maybe if we do it really conscientiously and if they're prepared and, we can't control how somebody is going to receive what we share with them. And if they're
Well,
not ready to take it for what it is, it can become complicated.
well, the good news is, as part of EFFT, the relationship repair intervention, we've developed it's 5 steps, and if you follow those five
Yeah.
steps, it's pretty much foolproof. And one of the steps is preparing for the other person's response. So either the blast, the silence, or the denial. So sometimes people will apologize to their kid or, and they'll get a blast, and that's
Oh,
really good news. That's really good news. That means it's being heard. And so there are steps to validate that blast. Or they'll get, a response of silence, which is basically a quiet anger. or denial. So I've worked with a lot
Okay.
of parents who, when they've apologized to their child, the child has said, "Oh no, don't worry, you were wonderful. It was great. It wasn't that bad." Even though the parent knew that what happened, was really challenging and difficult. And so we coach the parent to respond in very specific ways depending on how their child reacts. And so, yes, you can't always predict how the other person will respond. And yes, apologies have to be for the other when they're in relationship. But there are some strategies
Yeah.
that you can employ to maximize the effectiveness of the intervention.
Well, I know that there are a couple of people, at least on this webinar right now, who would love to read about that. So I just posted the link to Mental Health Foundations again. So you guys check that out for sure. And I would definitely like to know and read more about it. So with that, is there anything else you'd like to say on the intervention or on self-blame before we start taking questions?
No, I think that the more we can make it relevant for the people who are with us, the better. So just thanks for the time. This is something I'm really passionate about, if you haven't noticed. So
So,
it's great to be able to share.
so Doug asks, he says, this is confirming my thoughts to know thyself.
Mm,
Is that the best advice?
absolutely. It's very, very challenging. It's very painful at times because to know thyself, you need to know the shadow and you need to know the light. Um, and so the
Mhm.
shadow can feel like that mucky swamp. But knowing yourself, warts and all, and being able to love and accept yourself is the greatest gift you can give your children, actually. So, Doug, um,
Yes,
you're absolutely right.
know thyself. So,
The other thing is forgiving your co-parent for not being like you. That's another amazing gift you can give your child, even if you're
cool.
separated, divorced, estranged. Um, it's a really powerful,
Okay.
powerful way to release the child, because the child is made up of both parties, literally.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I like that. I like that. So, while we're waiting on other questions, um, I just like to loop back around to this distinction about what forgiveness is, because you spoke about it. So there are two like ways of viewing forgiveness. One is as a concept or as an idea, or what you, if you're a person of faith, might call a moral obligation. And when
Oh,
you
okay.
told the story about the child who'd been killed
Mm,
by the drunk driver, I think, and also the South Carolina shooting that happened a couple years ago is another example of this. And, forgiveness as a moral obligation, if that's what's true for you, is a beautiful thing. But what we're talking about here is a process. It's it's
exactly.
it's it's a it's something that we go through purposefully,
Hmm.
and it has practical implications for how health and happiness, and interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's an inside
so
job,
I think
as
that's
you've
a helpful
mentioned.
distinction, just to realize that. Yes, yeah, it is 100% an inside job. So Louis says thanks. He's going to check out the steps from the emotion focused family therapy. Doug says, oh, thank you, Doug. I look forward to seeing you tonight. Doug is coming to the forgiveness circle.
Oh, I
Um,
wish I could be there.
I am so happy to have. Yeah, I wish you could be here. Um, So we are all a witness to each other, and loving is so much fun. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, Doug. Thank you for saying that.
And really, if there's one other kind of practical point, like allow each other to offload the the deep pain or shame or self-blame that that you carry inside, so that you can move through it. So when Doug talks about being a witness for each other,
Yeah.
it's such a good point. And rather than rushing to reassure or make the other person feel better, be with them in moving through that really painful emotion, because only by going through that pain can you come to the place where you know deep in your heart that you did the best you could with what you had.
Yeah. It takes, I tell it's so true. Self-forgiveness is absolutely the most painful experience you can purposefully initiate and
It
engage in.
sounds
I'm not
really
even
nice,
kidding. It's just
but it's so
miserable.
hard.
It's not. It's horrible. People don't do it because it sucks. It's so
Now,
sucks. I
spoken
wouldn't have
like a
done it if
person who's done the
if I hadn't
work.
tried
That's so
everything else.
true.
I literally, yes, it's so painful, but it's what I hope and I pray people get is that it's totally worth it. You can live through hell. You can inflict hell in the world, and if you just move through the process and you know in your heart what the process is, and if you don't, you've got lots of resources.
Hmm.
It's worth it, because not only for ourselves but for the people in our lives. It is absolutely an expression of love and compassion for the world around us.
And to give parents a little extra motivation, um, to consider forgiving themselves. If you think about, there's nothing worse than seeing your child in pain, right? Except there is being a child and seeing your parent in pain. And so an
Oh,
act of self-forgiveness is a remarkable gift
mhm.
um, that is offered so widely and deeply. And so I really urge parents to walk through that swamp, holding someone's hand, even if it's Emily's book, so that you can give yourself that gift, but also give it to your children. And it will be a gift that keeps on giving. I promise you that.
Yes. Relationships just get stronger and better when you get out of the way.
Hmm.
So we're just about out of time. I do want to just take a couple of minutes and tell the people that are here or that watch the replay that I am launching a small group coaching series on May 1st. And I'm doing it, the first two groups are going to be offered at 50% off. So it's $199 for 2 full months of coaching, and it'll be a group of 4 to 5 people. So that's a really intimate group. You don't have to be in Austin. There'll be virtual groups, and you can find out more. Yeah, Cara, repost that because I think you have 2 links in there together. So you can find out more by going to emilyjhooks.com/group dash coaching, and that's got all of the details on it. There's an application there as well. And of course, you can reach out to me if you have any questions. And we will probably follow up with a thank you email. And if you have any links or additional information that we didn't share today that you'd like to share with the group, Adele, please send those
Yeah,
to
we
me and
have
I'll make
actually
sure
a
everybody
free
gets them.
webinar for parents coming up based on this work. And so if people are interested in getting a bit more and a bit more practical, then I'll be sure to include that link so that you can share that with your people.
When is it?
It is in May. I believe it's May 21st. Yeah.
May 21st. Okay, great. We'll definitely make sure everybody gets that. Okay, we're going to sign off for today. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. It's been a blessing, a great use of time. Thank you so much, Adele, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today. I love it. I can't wait to work. I can't wait to work more with you in the future.
Ditto.
So,
We'll certainly find a way. And thanks for having me. And thank you for building this platform for people to be able to free themselves from the pain of their past. It sounds cliche, but it really is so beautiful what you're helping people to do. And I hope that more and more people can hear about it, so that they can get that freedom as well.
thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody, be kind to yourself and others. And you're so welcome, guys. Thank you. God bless.
Bye bye.
Bye.